Hey, this is Shane, and welcome to my Curator of the Lost podcast. This episode is called Living to Haul and Hauling to Live. Have you ever driven down the road and seen something on the curb that you just had to stop and pick up? To be exact, I'm talking about items that are on the roadside, they're on the curb, because someone has thrown them away and they're waiting for the city trash pickup. When I see a pile of goods on the roadside curb, I admit, I have a desire to stop and go treasure hunting. I've seen furniture and shelving and old bikes that have tweaked my interest. In fact, several years ago, I was driving down our street with my wife, and a neighbor 4 doors down had put 3 chainsaws on the curb. I stopped the truck in the middle of the road, and I started to back up to the curb, and my wife calmly asked what I was doing. "What?" I reply. "I'm obviously going back to get the 3 chainsaws that we just passed." I say this as a matter of fact, just like the sky is blue or the pig is the most marvelous of all God's creations. Why wouldn't I stop for something like 3 chainsaws on the curb? She shakes her head and coolly but firmly explains that I don't need 3 roadside chainsaws. I have a perfectly good chainsaw at home. She calmly says to put the truck back in drive because we're not getting those chainsaws. Stopped in the road, we discussed the pros and cons of the 3 chainsaws, and after a few minutes, I reluctantly but insincerely agree that I don't really need 3 curbside chainsaws. As we move slowly away, I look out the rearview mirror, and I decide that if they're there when we return, I will stop and get them, regardless of her protest. That would definitely be a sign of faith that those 3 chainsaws should come home with me. If you've ever deposited a household or yard item out on the curb, you may notice that items are often gone before the city trash pickup arrives. Some of these pickups might occur by a random passerby like myself, but really overwhelming odds are that your item was picked up by a professional hauler. Haulers have schedules and territory. They know when the city curbs pickups are. They know when people typically put things out on the curb. They come through to a neighborhood the day or evening before, scouting for potential treasures in your discarded items. A hauler picks up curbside goods like patio furniture and lawnmowers and grills and raw materials, metals, wood, brick, wire, anything of potential value or resale potential. The hauler may recycle or refurbish these items. If something's broke, they may fix it or sell it as is. They could use it for parts or sell it for scrap. Some items go to flea markets or swap meets. Some sell from their trucks, and some have perpetual roadside sales that go on every day in their front yard. My first real experience with haulers was when my mom and dad moved from the house where I grew up in Tennessee. They'd lived there for 30 years or more and were downsizing. And as with most people, 30 years accumulation in one place adds up to a lot of junk. For this house in particular, the worst part of the move was clearing out what we called the shop. The shop was a basement workshop that you could only get to from the outside, and over the years it had become a catch-all for spare parts, surplus materials, and forgotten projects. It was crammed full of good and bad junk, to include things in the back recesses of the basement that likely had not been viewed by human eyes for over a decade. So one bright, sunny Saturday morning, roughly a week before the pending move, my dad and I took a deep breath and we tackled cleaning out the basement workshop. For hours we pulled things out of the basement. We deposited items in various piles of sorting and discard, and toward the end of the exodus we uncovered it was an item of personal shame for myself. It was the remnants of an upright piano. I'd bought it at an auction nearly 15 years earlier for a mere $5. At the time, I had envisioned this piano, the innards of the piano. They were going to form an abstract art sculpture. The internal mechanisms were going to form this intricate and interesting harp assembly that would be mounted on a sturdy wall. But as with many projects unfulfilled, the large metal inner workings of the piano got abandoned in the rear reaches of the basement storage. As we cleared things out, this metal monstrosity became the first item to be dragged to the truck, ready for the city dump. At that time, our small Tennessee town did not have a waste or debris pickup at your house. We lived out in the country, so you had to take all of your garbage and recyclable materials to a centralized dumpster park. At this park, there were large metal dumpsters marked for wood and metal and plastic and other recyclables, but there was also a huge compactor where you put your regular household trash. The park was staffed by two middle-aged men that were twins. For years, these twins had worked at a local automotive junkyard, parting out and crushing old cars, but when the owners sold that property, the twins found new employment working at the local dumpster park. Their duties were to oversee garbage drop-off and compactor operation, but they had expanded, let's say, their responsibilities to personally inspect everyone's trash. That is, they would literally open up your trash bags before deposit to the compactor to see if there was anything they wanted or needed. In fact, next to their little shed at the dumpster park, they had items for sale from things that were pulled from the trash. Do you need a bicycle for $20? They had one. You need a baby stroller for $10? You could get it there. What can you say? The twins were enterprising city employees with a little upcycle side hustle. Interestingly enough, the twins had competition at this township dumpster park. Competition from professional haulers. We realized this with the first truckload of items from the basement cleanout, where upon our arrival to the central dump, we were greeted by 4 strangers at the sorting bins. These gentlemen spent the day helping people unload household refuse for the opportunity of claiming first dibs on the trash. This was before it was thrown into the city recycling bins, or even before the twins could make claim for items to stock their department store at the compactor shed. As we unloaded lumber and metal and old go-kart parts, the haulers were having a grand time, pulling every other item out of the dump pile and depositing it into their respective truck pile. We didn't mind. The help was welcome, and the haulers were very enthusiastic. As we continued to unload, the metal of that old piano frame suddenly emerged from the truck bed. It was like Excalibur, thrust from the water by the Lady of the Lake. With this, the haulers actually flinched. They took a step back. They were twitching with anticipation, had a sudden glisten of sweat emerging on each upper lip. After a few seconds of silence, the elder hauler exclaimed, "Is that aluminum?" There was another younger hauler quickly saying he had a magnet in his car, and he run to retrieve it, at which point the elder hauler shook his head and quipped, "If that boy's going to haul, he needs to get himself a truck." The young would-be hauler returned, magnet in hand, and he shakily handed it to the elder leader. And hauler the elder reached to the protruding piano frame. He touched it with a magnet, and unfortunately, it stuck. No aluminum. It was cast iron. There was a collective groan of disappointment, but the hauler shrugged and helped us deposit the piano remnants to the metal recycle container. And, with that help and that action, I've often thought that them continuing to help us unload the heavy piano parts after that letdown of no aluminum, it revealed a lot of character for the hauling denizens of the Tennessee centralized dumpster park. But a more recent example with haulers came on Saturday morning. It was a knock at the door, and it was my buddy Steve. It was kind of early in the morning for Steve, but it was a bright and sunny, cool morning. But Steve was sweating profusely, and he leaned on the door frame, and he weakly peeped, "I need your help." It turns out that Steve had a treadmill that no longer worked, and he wanted to load it up on his truck and take it to the dump. This treadmill was a deluxe model with all the bells and whistles, just the type of exercise equipment, that you buy with the intention of using every day forever. This thing was built to last forever. It had mass. It was extremely heavy, very unwieldy. The problem was it was upstairs, and that's the reason Steve was sweating and about to pass out. He had first tried to move it on his own and realized, discretion being the better part of valor, that was a mistake. So I marched upstairs with him, and we manhandled this mechanical behemoth down the steps and through the garage, and we actually managed to do this without destroying anything in the house. But as we rested our backs and regained our breath, Steve said, "All right, let's lower the truck gate, put this in, get it over, I'll take it to the dump." And I looked at him kind of quizzically. I said, "Why are you taking it to the dump? Just put it on the street and let the haulers get it." To which Steve looked at me and says, "Haulers? What are haulers?" So at this point, I take it upon myself to explain the concept of the hauler to Steve, since he was uninitiated and uninformed and had just generally not paid any attention. I give him the spiel on their schedule and territory and the general practice and concept of hauling. I explain that haulers are a vital part of the underground economy, and there's a great value in the hauling subculture. In fact, in this day of reuse and repurposing, being a hauler is cutting edge and cool. Steve blinks his eyes a couple of times and says, "Seriously? Someone will pick up this junk? Are you kidding me?" I explained to just trust me. We dragged this treadmill down the driveway, put it on the curb, and guess what? Less than an hour later, Steve frantically knocks at my door. He's giddy with excitement. "You are not going to believe this," he begins. Yep, the haulers had already come up, picked up the treadmill from the curb, leaving another happy customer without his junk. So as I closed my door, satisfied that my advice to Steve resulted in a fulfilled prophecy, I flashed back to my own personal brushes with hauling. I think that in an alternate universe, I may be a hauler. I would pass my days down at the city dump or roaming the streets in a beater truck, looking for things to haul, and I remember a distant memory of 3 chainsaws that were not destined by fate to still be on the curb when we returned home. And with that, I smile to myself and think I'm lucky. Lucky for living in this universe where my wife is a blessing and ultimately responsible for me not descending on the path of living to haul and hauling to live. That's it. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll talk to you soon.